As the golden light of early morning slid across the tiled rooftops of Rome, the city seemed to stretch awake like a giant who had shaped the world with stone hands, because everywhere you looked, from roads to walls to arches, there were quiet reminders that Roman ideas had traveled far beyond these hills and were still whispering their stories to the future. Long before anyone spoke of legacies or history books, Roman builders had already imagined a world connected by straight roads and sturdy bridges, and as carts rattled over stone pavements polished smooth by countless wheels, it became clear that these paths were not just for travel, but for spreading ideas, laws, and habits that refused to stay in one place. Merchants setting up their stalls in busy forums often had no idea that the simple measurements they used, the coins they counted, and the contracts they trusted were all part of a system that would echo for centuries, shaping how people far away would later trade, calculate, and promise one another fairness. Even the language drifting through the air carried invisible roots, because Latin words slipped into conversations like seeds carried by the wind, selling into other tongues and slowly growing into new languages that still carried Roman echoes in their sounds and meanings. As children walked to lessons with wax tablets under their arms learning letters and rules of grammar, they were unknowingly rehearsing patterns of education that would survive the fall of emperors, reappearing in monasteries, schools, and universities many lifetimes later. The city's buildings stood like open books written in stone, where arches showed how weight could be balanced with clever curves, and domes demonstrated that imagination and mathematics could cooperate to create spaces that felt both enormous and welcoming at the same time. When sunlight streamed through columns and cast striped shadows across public squares, it reminded onlookers that Roman architects had mastered not just strength but beauty, blending function with style in a way future builders would study with admiration and curiosity. Water flowed everywhere, guided by aqueducts that marched across valleys like disciplined soldiers, proving that practical engineering could also be graceful, and that caring for everyday needs such as clean water could be one of the greatest gifts a civilization could offer. In bathhouses filled with steam and laughter, people of different backgrounds gathered to relax, talk, and argue, creating a social rhythm that showed how shared spaces could help communities feel connected. A lesson cities would continue to learn and reel across time. Roman laws, carefully written and displayed, were more than rules meant to control behavior, because they introduced ideas about rights, duties, and fairness that would later inspire legal systems far beyond Italy's borders. Judges listening to cases in echoing halls relied on principles like evidence and testimony, planting the idea that justice should follow reason rather than pure power, even if reality sometimes fell short of that ideal. As soldiers marched along distant frontiers, carrying shields and standards, they also carried Roman habits, games, and customs, turning military camps into seeds of towns that blended local traditions with Roman order. These camps often grew into cities with forums, baths, and theaters, showing how Roman planning could transform empty land into organized communities that valued gathering places and shared experiences. In theaters filled with music and dramatic gestures, audiences laughed at comedies and gasped at tragedies, discovering that stories could entertain while also teaching lessons about pride, kindness, and foolish mistakes. Writers and poets scratched words onto scrolls by lamplight, shaping stories, speeches, and histories that would survive fires, wars, and centuries, because later readers found their thoughts too powerful to forget. As scribes copied texts again and again, each careful stroke helped carry Roman ideas forward, ensuring that knowledge would not vanish even when buildings crumbled and borders shifted. The Roman calendar quietly organized days into weeks and months, guiding festivals, work, and rest, and although names and details changed over time, its structure continued to influence how people measured their lives. Public celebrations filled streets with color and noise, teaching communities that shared rituals could strengthen bonds, a concept that future societies would repeat in their own festivals and holidays. Roman coins, stamped with faces and symbols, traveled from hand to hand, spreading not only economic trust, but also images and messages that reminded everyone who held power and what values were celebrated. As families gathered at dinner tables, following customs of hospitality and hierarchy, they modeled social patterns that later cultures would adapt, adjust, or challenge as they built their own traditions. The idea of citizenship, though imperfect and limited, suggested that belonging to a state carried responsibilities as well as privileges, planting a seed that would later grow into debates about rights and participation. Road signs and milestones marked distances with precision, showing that organization and planning could tame vast spaces, making the world feel smaller and more connected. In distant provinces, local gods were often blended with Roman ones, revealing a flexible approach to belief that allowed ideas to merge rather than collide, a strategy that helped Rome rule such a diverse empire. This blending of cultures created art, music, and customs that felt both familiar and new, proving that exchange could be more powerful than force alone. Roman clothing styles, from simple tunics to formal togas, carried meanings about status and occasion, influencing how future societies would use dress to communicate identity. The discipline of Roman armies demonstrated how training, teamwork, and clear organization could turn ordinary people into an effective force, a lesson studied by military leaders long after Rome's banners fell. Engineering manuals and practical knowledge passed quietly from one generation to another, preserving techniques for building roads, bridges, and machines that would later inspire medieval and modern engineers. As emperors rose and fell, monuments remained, reminding future visitors that power could fade while ideas endured. Travelers walking through ruins centuries later would still recognize the logic of Roman layouts, sensing that these cities had been designed with intention rather than chance. The Roman habit of recording history, even when biased or dramatic, taught later historians the importance of preserving stories, arguments, and events for reflection and learning. Public speeches delivered in forums emphasized rhetoric and persuasion, shaping how leaders would later argue, debate, and inspire crowds. Even everyday objects like keys, lamps, and tools revealed a focus on practicality and durability that influenced design long after Roman workshops closed. As trade networks connected continents, Roman demand encouraged production of goods from faraway lands, helping create early versions of global exchange. Maps drawn by Roman geographers attempted to explain the world's shape, sparking curiosity that future explorers would carry further. Legal contracts written in careful language showed that trust could be built through clear agreements, an idea central to later business and law. Public infrastructure, such as sewers and streets, demonstrated that caring for shared spaces was essential for healthy cities. Roman education emphasized memorization, debate, and imitation, shaping learning methods that persisted for centuries. The blending of Greek philosophy with Roman practicality created a unique intellectual tradition that balanced thinking with action. As Christianity spread within the empire, Roman roads and administration helped new ideas travel faster than ever before. Church organization later borrowed heavily from Roman administrative structures, proving how adaptable these systems were. Even after political collapse, Roman influence survived in monasteries, manuscripts, and customs quietly kept alive. Kings and rulers across Europe looked back to Rome as a model, borrowing titles, symbols, and laws to strengthen their authority. The very idea of an empire ruling diverse peoples continued to shape political dreams and warnings alike. Artists studied Roman statues to learn proportion and realism, reviving these techniques during later cultural renaissances. Architects returned to Roman designs when imagining grand public buildings meant to inspire awe. Modern city planning still echoes Roman grids, forums, and public centers. Legal terms derived from Latin remain embedded in modern law, connecting courtrooms to ancient halls. Scientific vocabulary carries Roman and Latin roots, shaping how knowledge is named and organized. Even modern alphabets owe their forms to Roman lettering carved into stone. Tourists walking Roman roads today unknowingly follow paths laid out with careful measurement long ago. The Roman idea that laws should be written and visible remains central to many societies. Public service roles echo Roman administrative offices in structure and responsibility. Roman stories continue to inspire books, films, and games, keeping their world alive in imagination. The mix of grandeur and everyday practicality defines Rome's enduring appeal. Rome's mistakes, including inequality and excess, serve as warnings alongside its achievements. By studying Rome, people learn how power can build and destroy. The legacy of Rome is not one single monument, but a web of ideas. Each road, law, word, and building connects past to present. Rome's influence proves that civilizations can outlive themselves through ideas. As long as people build cities, write laws, and tell stories, Rome's shadow remains. This shadow is not dark, but instructive, reminding humanity of what it has already imagined and achieved. The legacy of Rome continues to unfold, shaped anew by every generation that studies, questions, and reuses its ancient gifts. As the centuries rolled onward and Roman emperors faded into statues and stories, the ideas Rome had planted continued to travel quietly but persistently, slipping into new lands through lost roads. Languages and habits that people adopted almost without noticing, much like seeds carried by the wind that later grew into forests, shaping entirely new worlds. Across Europe and beyond, Roman roads remained stubbornly useful long after legions stopped marching upon them because merchants, pilgrims, messengers, and wandering families discovered that stone-laid paths, carefully measured and solidly built, made travel faster, safer, and more reliable than anything that came before. These roads did more than move feet and wheels because along them traveled stories, inventions, styles of clothing, religious beliefs, and even jokes, all mixing together as cultures met and blended, proving that Rome's greatest strength was not only conquering lands but connecting people. In towns that once flew Roman banners, public buildings still followed Roman plans, with forums turning into market squares, bathhouses inspiring public gathering spaces, and amphitheaters becoming the ancestors of stadiums where crowds still gather to cheer, argue, and share collective excitement. Roman law quietly became one of the most powerful legacies of all because the idea that laws should be written down, debated, and applied consistently helped later societies imagine justice not as the whim of rulers, but as a system meant to protect communities. Judges, lawyers, and lawmakers in distant centuries found themselves returning to Roman legal ideas, studying old texts, and adapting ancient rules to modern problems, often without realizing how deeply Roman thinking shaped their sense of fairness, responsibility, and civic duty. Language carried Rome forward in subtle but lasting ways because Latin slowly transformed into many new tongues, giving birth to Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, while also filling English and other languages with words related to law, science, government, and everyday life. Even children today unknowingly speak echoes of Rome when they use words like school, library, or manual because Latin roots remain woven into modern speech, quietly reminding the world that language can be one of history's strongest bridges. Roman engineering continued to impress long after aqueducts stopped flowing because the principles behind arches, concrete, and domes inspired architects who marveled at how ancient builders achieved strength, balance, and beauty without modern machines. Cathedrals, government buildings, museums, and universities borrowed Roman shapes and ideas, lifting columns skyward and curving roofs overhead as if each stone whispered gratitude to ancient designers who proved that thoughtful structure could last for millennia. Cities learned from Roman organization because the concept of planned streets, public sanitation, and shared spaces showed later generations that healthy, orderly environments helped communities thrive rather than collapse into chaos. Roman baths inspired the idea that cleanliness and social interaction mattered together, influencing public bathhouses, spas, and eventually modern plumbing systems that made clean water a daily expectation rather than a rare luxury. The Roman army left behind lessons not only about warfare, but about discipline, training, and logistics because the ability to feed, clothe, and organize large groups taught future leaders how preparation often mattered more than raw strength. Political thinkers studied Roman successes and failures carefully, noting how republics could rise through cooperation and fall through greed, corruption, or unchecked ambition, turning Roman history into a long classroom for anyone willing to learn. Even when Rome's empire fractured, the idea of citizenship survived, reminding people that belonging to a community carried both rights and responsibilities that extended beyond family or tribe. Roman religion also left its mark because early Christianity grew within Roman borders, using Roman roads to spread, Roman cities to gather followers, and Roman administration to organize itself into a structure that could survive long after emperors vanished. Stories of Roman gods blended with new beliefs, transforming myths into lessons, art, and symbolism that continue to influence paintings, literature, and storytelling across centuries. Artists and writers returned to Roman themes repeatedly because tales of heroes, emperors, senators, and citizens offered endless material about courage, mistakes, ambition, and everyday life. Students studied Roman history not because it was ancient, but because it felt familiar, showing how humans struggled with power, identity, and cooperation in ways that still felt relevant. Roman coins, statues, and ruins became clues for archaeologists who carefully brushed away dirt to reveal not just objects, but stories about ordinary people who cooked meals, argued in markets, and worried about their futures. Museums filled with Roman artifacts allowed modern visitors to peer into the past, imagining the sound of sandals on stone floors and the echo of voices beneath marble arches. Rome's legacy also included warnings because environmental strain, economic inequality, and political instability showed how even the strongest systems could weaken if ignored too long. Teachers used Rome as a giant example, explaining how balance between power and responsibility mattered, and how listening to many voices could strengthen societies rather than slow them down. In classrooms around the world, maps of the Roman Empire sparked curiosity, leading students to trace borders, follow roads, and imagine life inside cities buzzing with activity. Modern governments borrowed Roman symbols deliberately, choosing eagles, columns, and Latin phrases to suggest strength, continuity, and legitimacy rooted in history. Calendars still carry Roman influence because months named after gods and emperors quietly mark time, connecting modern days to ancient traditions. Even the idea of weekends, public holidays, and civic festivals echoes Roman customs that balanced work, rest, and celebration. Roman food traditions influenced diets as recipes spread across regions, mixing local ingredients with Mediterranean habits that valued bread, olives, and shared meals. The Roman habit of record-keeping helped future historians understand the past because letters, laws, and inscriptions preserved voices that might otherwise have vanished completely. Libraries became guardians of Roman knowledge, protecting texts through wars, fires, and neglect, ensuring ideas survived even when buildings crumbled. Travelers visiting Roman ruins today often feel a strange familiarity because arches, streets, and plazas resemble spaces still used in modern cities. Tour guides tell stories that blend fact and imagination, helping visitors picture senators debating, children playing, and traders haggling beneath the same stones. Rome's influence crossed oceans as European explorers carried Roman-inspired ideas to distant continents, shaping laws, languages, and city planning far from the original empire. Even disagreements about Rome reveal its power because scholars continue debating its achievements and failures, proving that its story still matters. Children learn Roman myths and history through books, games, and films, discovering that ancient stories can feel exciting, funny, and meaningful all at once. Roman legacy lives in the simple idea that public spaces belong to everyone, encouraging people to gather, talk, and participate in community life. Sports arenas owe a quiet debt to Roman amphitheaters, where the concept of mass entertainment brought strangers together for shared experiences. Legal phrases in Latin still appear in courtrooms, linking modern justice to ancient reasoning through words that survived centuries unchanged. Roman measurement systems influenced how people calculated distance, weight, and time, shaping science and trade long after legions disappeared. The idea of professional administration grew from Roman bureaucracy, teaching later societies how organization could support large populations. Roman education emphasized rhetoric and debate, skills still valued when people learned to express ideas clearly and persuasively. Writers borrowed Roman styles, crafting speeches and essays that echoed ancient rhythms while addressing modern concerns. Even failures taught lessons, because Rome's collapse showed how ignoring inequality and overextending resources could weaken any civilization. Historians compared Rome to later empires, using it as a mirror to examine power and responsibility. The memory of Rome encouraged preservation, inspiring efforts to protect historic buildings and cultural heritage. Archaeological discoveries constantly add new details, reminding everyone that history is never completely finished. Rome's story proves that civilizations are built layer by layer, through choices made by ordinary people as much as famous leaders. Parents and teachers use Roman examples to explain teamwork, leadership, and the importance of roles. Modern cities still echo Rome when they build plazas, forums, and gathering places. Rome taught the world that infrastructure could shape daily life for generations. Even in digital ages, Roman concepts of law and governance guide decisions. Rome's legacy is not frozen in ruins but alive in habits, systems, and ideas. Every bridge, road, or courthouse inspired by Roman thought continues the story. The empire may have fallen, but its influence adapted and survived. Rome reminds humanity that ideas can outlast armies. Its greatest achievement was shaping how people live together. As long as societies build, debate, and remember, Rome's echo continues. History carries Rome forward not as a conqueror, but as a teacher. The legacy of Rome lives wherever communities value connection, structure, and shared purpose.